So I'll try to move it around. Okay, so what we're going to talk about today is, of course, just to put you in the context of where we are. We have the 5 areas, and I don't know why it's doing that. There we go. So we have the mental, spiritual, and social that we've already talked about. Next week is the physical development, and today is emotional. And as I mentioned last week, I think the emotional is very tied into a lot of the other things, and you'll see some of those tentacles today. Part of what we'll talk about then is I have kind of a 3, 4, 5 for you today. We want to have the 3 ready, set, goodbye commitments for emotional development, the 4 type of parents and what impact they have on their child, and the 5 love languages and how to apply them. I'm hoping, does that make things better? I think I'm getting a lot of glare off the screen onto my glasses here, but anyway, they'll just look more blue than normal. And then we'll go on with some Q&A time after that. So the three things that are the commitments, and we want to delve into these on how to help your child manage their emotions and build self-confidence. So the commitments that I want you to make to your child are: we will teach you how to process and manage your emotions. We will also provide a safe place where you can express your emotions. And we will aim to build your self-confidence, self-esteem, and resilience in dealing with stress and obstacles. So again, if you haven't joined us for this before, I would prefer that you literally are saying these things to your child. And I'm considering, I know I've talked to Jared about this, about I haven't had time to do it, but I'm hoping when the series concludes, but before we end the semester, that I will actually have time to go back and put some pieces together of things you can do with your child. And I'd love for y'all to experiment with that and see how that works. But even if you don't say these things literally to your child, I want you to commit to them as parents and manage and partner with them from that perspective. So I want to go through each one of these in some more detail, and then we'll get into the other topics. So first of all is teaching them about emotions, processing and managing emotions. Give them space. Give them space sometimes for emotions. You don't have to try to manage every emotion they have. Instead, we want you to be able to kind of be with them through that process, but sometimes it means not doing anything. When I was in 8th grade, I was the quarterback of the football team, and we were terrible. We lost every game. We not only lost every game, I think we scored 1 touchdown all year, and it was on defense, not on offense. So we were just pathetic. And I would come home every game embarrassed and mad, and I really didn't want to talk about it. You know, my parents would be like, "You want to talk about it?" No, I want to go sit in my room and sulk for a while. And I'd get over it, and then maybe I'd come out and talk about it. So, we want to give them space sometimes to work on it on their own, but we do want to be there for them and work with them on it. One thing that I thought was interesting as I did research with this is that anger may sometimes mask other emotions. You may just see your child as angry. And it's interesting that teens sometimes think that fear and sadness are bad emotions, so they'll use anger instead, but anger may be masking something else. And I think that's, that may have to do with adults too sometimes. So, what we want to do is help them understand that all their emotions are valid. And it may be difficult for them to identify and separate those emotions. They're kind of a jumble. It's hard to say it's just one thing. They may have a lot of different emotions going on. But it's important if they can get to where that they can process their feelings, and they can have a deeper understanding of how to unspaghetti all those emotions. There's research that shows that teens that know that they can share difficult feelings with a parent are more likely to be able to constructively work through their problems. And then there's the importance, as we said, of identifying those feelings and then being able to articulate the feelings and to be able to speak to what they are. I know sometimes in dealing with my kids, it's been hard for them at times to actually say what they're feeling, to put it into words. I don't have it written on the slide, but something you might want to think about that I learned as a technique, and it's used as a grief technique, but I think it has some other great applications, is I call it the hospital chaplain technique, because I learned it from a hospital chaplain. And what he would do is he's meeting with people who either have a death imminent for their loved one or the loved one has just passed. And a lot of times, they're sitting there in silence in a waiting room or something. And he would just try to put something into words, just put something out of what they're feeling. Like, this must be such a shock. Yes, it's a shock because, one day they were here, the next day we're here with this and they're gone. Or you must be feeling kind of helpless. Yes, it's like, I want to fix things, but I can't fix this. Things like that. He would just lob things out that just kind of stated it out in the air and then let them wrap around that. And I think that's a great technique, not just for grief, but also for your child, to be able to see how to get them to articulate those feelings. I think another interesting thing is the idea of what would happen if you accepted your feelings. Because a lot of times we don't want to have that feeling of fear or sadness or whatever. And a teen can think that if I accept this feeling, I'm accepting it always. I am settling for this feeling. I don't want this feeling. But what we're trying to tell them is how to accept it for now. This is where you are right now, and accept it and kind of live in it, and then you work through it, right? Rather than fighting it so much. And of course, articulating or releasing feelings can come in a lot of different ways. I have a list there for you. For me, the ones that have mostly worked are the first two, journaling and music. When I was in high school and college, if I had a breakup, if I had, something I was mad about, I'd write a song. It wasn't a really good song, but it was a song. It was an expression, right? And it got it out. And it was a good song for what the moment was, right? But later on, it's kind of a crummy song. Prayer is another one that would help. And just, there's all kinds of different things for people. So, look at how they can release those feelings. And of course, we want to model, like everything else we're talking about this, being a role model for your child. They watch so much of what you do, and what you do is so much more than what you say, because you speak volumes with your actions. So the way you handle your own emotions, if you're very emotional and you get angry easily, then it's hard to tell them to calm down as a result of that. Okay, let's look at a safe place to express emotions. I like this picture of this girl here because, her mood looks like it's as twisted as her hair right there. It's all knotted up. Let's give them the gift of expressing emotions. Man, that is sometimes difficult because we want to put things back on a stable state. Sometimes they're not really great at the way that they express things. They can misdirect anger or whatever. However, I do think it's good that if there's, really tilting very far, that we rein them in, give them a cooling off period, or help them to find ways to blow off steam. Sorry. It's still early. I was on meetings all week. All I did was talk all day, every day, and night even. So long week for my voice, plus allergies. Well, one thing I wanted to say here is I had one child, my middle child, who we were talking, after he became an adult. He said at one point, you always sided with mom when we were having an argument. I said, that's not true at all. We would let you come out and say what you needed to say, but I would shut you down when you got to a point where you were out of control or when you were being extremely disrespectful. And that's when I would send you to your room and say, you cool off, and then let's talk about it some more. And when he thought about that, he realized that's what was going on. He realized the truth of it as he remembered through it, that's what I was really doing. So I do think it's important to keep it under some confines, and not let it spend too much to where, if you need it, let's get the cooling off period. However, we don't want to minimize their emotions. I know we can be like, this friend's not worth it or whatever. It's not the end of the world, this setback. But of course, they feel that way, and they don't have the depth of experience to feel differently. So we certainly want to honor their emotions as they're going through things. I want to say something also. I don't know how many of you, your parents are getting older, but I'll tell you this, I'm finding the same thing with my elderly mother, is that she has things that just blow up like a teenager, that she thinks it's the biggest thing in the world. How somebody talked to her in the laundry room, or they looked at her clothes, or what, it's mom, and so I don't know, I guess you revert sometimes when you get older, but practice it now. You'll use it on your parents later, I think. One thing that's interesting is to bite your tongue. And this is something I don't think I always did really well. But there's times when you're picking apart their story that you can see things that they did wrong on their end. They held some responsibility for whatever the situation was. I told you last week about my daughter being the chair of the president of the dance club. And when she would tell me what was going on, it's like, you didn't handle that very well, did you? But, after a while, you start learning that maybe you can unpack that later. What they're kind of in an emotional state now, you can get them into the mental side, into the decision-making later. So maybe for the moment, you're biting your tongue, or letting them vent, you're letting them kind of sort through those emotions. And then once they've sorted through it, there's going to be a time to come back and be able to say, hey, let's talk about, the decision-making side. Let's talk about the social side, how you handled the communication, how you made your decision there. But otherwise, you're letting them kind of work it out for themselves on the emotional side. Be vulnerable and share when appropriate. I think vulnerability is very important at all ages for you to be able to open up other people when you share on your own. And sometimes that helps if they're having a hard time expressing an emotion, but you also don't want to turn every problem into about you. So I think there's appropriate times. I'll give you an example of one, is that my daughter, for very valid reasons of her history, has developed a mindset that she isn't good enough, and that she really needs to work very, very hard and go over the top to be good enough, or else she won't be accepted. And when I uncovered this, we're driving around one day, and I decided to just keep driving through the neighborhood until we were done talking. And I said, hey, I want you to know something. I was the small town preacher's kid where I felt like had to be either the best kid or the worst kid. And you never feel, I wanted to be the best kid, and you never feel like you're good enough. And that thing is carried over into my life, and it has ramifications. I'm not going to tell you, oh, you're really good, you're really smart, everything's fine, you're perfect. I'm not going to tell you that. I'm going to tell you, you're going to wrestle with this your whole life, and it's going to crop up at times when you least expect it. And you have to manage yourself. You need to monitor yourself for when you're falling into that mindset, and you need to have a way to get out of that mindset and not exhibit behaviors you don't want to, either externally or internally. And I think that helped her more. In fact, when I was doing this lesson, I went back to her and I said, do you remember that conversation? What did we talk about? And she remembered some of it, she remembered most of it. And we actually sat down and had another 45-minute conversation, a really good conversation about that, which led into this, that, and the other also, with things going on in her life now. So I think there's times when it's important to be vulnerable and share, and not minimize. Oh, you're fine, you're good enough. Sometimes evidence is to the contrary, or sometimes you need to realize it's your worldview, your self-view that's doing that. And at times you need to have them consider therapy. I find young people have a lot of the same resistance that we might have had growing up to therapy, but sometimes therapy can be very useful, and sometimes people may have problems that we're as parents not even able to deal with, or to say the right words. Okay, let's keep moving. The magic trick, I think, to getting your teen to talking. So I promised you this, and this is a proven technique. I've used it, and I've shared it with parents, and their reaction is, it works great. I can't get them to stop talking. Go to their bedroom after 11 p.m. You're going into their world. You are sitting there at the dinner table, wanting them to share everything at the dinner table. That's not the time they're ready to do it, or maybe not the forum they're ready to do it. But if you walk into their bedroom and it's just you and them, they will open up. Late at night, they're more awake, they're alive, energetic, alert. Um, Take advantage of that. That's when they're going to be expansive. That's when you can get them talking, either directly or through indirect means. You can get them talking about things. I've had parents tell me, I couldn't turn it off. I was so tired. It was past midnight. I needed to go to bed. I needed to see, I needed to come back and the next morning. And here I am. I didn't want to stop because I really had them going, but I couldn't even keep my eyes open for it. So this is the kind of thing that can really happen. And I have a lot of evidence of other people, not just my kids, having gone through that. So try that. Even though your inclination may be, why are you up? You should be in bed at 11. Before you say that, maybe you can take the time to find out what's going on with them and give me some feedback, see if it works for you. But I haven't yet had a parent say it doesn't work. Everyone who's come back has said it works. So give it a try. Okay. Self-confidence, self-esteem, and resiliency. Let me see if I can get through this because it's a very difficult subject. I spent a long time thinking about this. And I've tried to boil it down into something simple because the self-confidence, you can find a lot of things out there and things that you should do and all these steps, and everybody's got a plan and everything. But the problem, the fundamental problem is it's often tied to success. It's hard to say to somebody, be confident. I mean, it's easy to say, but it's hard for them to hear. Be confident. You become confident because of your track record. And then that ties into your self-view, or you may even have a self-view already, the way you look at your successes and failures. And you can have a positive or a negative spiral. My wife and I were talking about this, that right now in where I want to be with my ministry, I'm doing a lot of things, but it's not like there's not a lot of commercial success or a lot of people following me or whatever. And the thing is that I don't really know exactly the right way that I'm going to make this happen. But I know from my track record that I will figure it out. I have a positive view. I have the self-confidence that one way or another it's going to work out. But another person might not in that situation. If they've had a lot of negative stuff, and we'll talk about parenting and the impact on that in a moment, but they may have a self-view of negativity. And what happens is that you look for evidence to justify your self-view. You look for evidence to justify your self-view. If you have 3 wins in a row, but you think you suck, and then you have a negative, you're going to go right back into the pit, right? The 3 wins were false evidence in your mind. And it can be the opposite way. With me, maybe I have 3 failures in a row, but then I have a win. It's like, yeah, I'm back on a roll, right? I'm very fortunate in that regard, but not everybody, not all my children, not everybody I know in my family has that. And I can see it's extremely difficult to overcome. So some of the strategies to use is, first of all, there's a spiritual component to this. God gives us value and worth. God believes in our value and worth. And even if they don't believe it, you want them to believe that you believe it and that God believes it, that they do have value and worth, regardless of what the circumstance is. And you want to build confidence as much as possible through small wins. Take those little wins and say, look, and yeah, you're going to have a setback, but look at this. You did this right. This is working, and we want to try to turn losses into wins with resilience. The more I have thought about self-confidence and self-esteem, the more I think it has to do with that life skill of resilience, of bouncing back. That's really, even more than the win, how you gain the self-confidence. If you believe that you are or accept that, you know what, that's a problem not worth solving, or you know what, I've got better things to do. This was a failure, but I've got other stuff to do that's more important. I'm going to set that one aside. I'm going to go win in this other kind of thing. So it's kind of compartmentalizing failures and being able to say, this part was a failure, but not everything I do is a failure. And I think positive thinking and affirmations can be very important. I had a time when I worked 2 years in a job I really wanted, but for a boss who was demoralizing and demeaning and took away any kind of self-esteem you had. And driving to work and returning from work every day, I had some cards I would read in the car that were all the positive affirmations. I had to build myself up to go in and repair myself afterward to go back home. Um, and I think just, the biggest thing is looking at it's a very slippery slope to start going down into a lack of self-esteem. So you want to be able to identify when they've had a setback. How are you feeling about that? How are you going to go forward? And really try to take their temperature and see how are they feeling about that, and how is it affecting their self-worth, and maybe get them talking about that. This spiritual view of the way your view of God is and what your value and worth is, that's going to make a difference. If you have a strong social network, and in that social network you're able to identify friends who are trusted that you can talk to, all those things have a big impact in this area. Okay, so I'm gonna shift gears quite a bit and move on to another topic now, which is the 4 types of parents. And this is as important as anything I'm going to tell you today. I want you, when you're thinking about it, to first of all think about your own parents or grandparents and what you've seen in your family. And then second, maybe not right now, but in some real self-evaluation, I want you to look at yourself and see where you fall and how you can get better at what you're doing. I will send out these slides later, so you'll have all of them to review. So there's 4 types of parents. This comes from my guy, Gary Smalley, who I refer to it a lot. And, I recommend anything he's written. He goes back 20, 30 years, but, I think what he talks about is true today. So there's 2 parts of this grid. There's on the left side, on that part, we're looking at love and support for your children. So that kind of goes along these rows, the low and the high. And then there's controlling children by limits or rules at home, and there's low control and there's high control. Okay, so let's kind of walk through each one of these types of parents. So the first is the dominant parent. This is the one that has high rules, high control, high limits, but low love and support. They have very high standards and expectations. They don't give reasons for what their rules are. The rules are not flexible, and they don't really offer much warm and caring support. The child kind of feels like their love tank is empty. What they say, things that come out of their mouths. Rules are rules. You're late. To bed with no dinner. I won't stand for your back talk. Apologize. Or slaps the child's face. You don't need reasons. Just do what I say. And what happens to their children is they become the lowest in self-esteem and self-respect. They also are actually the most rebellious. They will either rebel against their parents or they will clam up. There was a kid last year on our teen panel. We're going to do the teen panel in a couple of weeks. There was a guy that on the outside, great kid, you would have thought there was nothing wrong with him. Turned out he shared that his parents were very dominant, and as a result, he didn't say anything to them. He said, my parents don't know anything that's going on in my life. I rely on my friends for that. I don't tell my parents anything. I say the minimum to them. I was really, really surprised by that. He doesn't come across as rebellious, but you can see the relationship isn't there. And they tend to reject their parents' values, and they may be disruptive in other settings, like in class. There was a guy on my wife's side of the family, a distant relative, that saw my kids acting up one time, and he said, discipline begins at home, an old Iowa farmer. And his boys, they would say, when they came to visit you, those 3 boys went and sat on the couch, they got in a row, and they didn't say a word the whole time. But I also heard that when they weren't around Dad, they were completely different people, very rebellious, very acting out. So that's something that we have to remember is, we may think we're controlling them, but they're going to get their chance to control themselves. It may not be what we want. Let's move on. Neglectful parent. I'm sorry. Sometimes this week my keyboard and mouse have just wanted to keep going. So this is low control, but then low support and love for their children. So they tend to stay away from their children by doing their own activities. There's frequent sitters. I had a friend who was a nanny, and she had a couple that was like this, and she witnessed this. They had very few rules, but they also weren't engaged with their children at all. The way they engaged with them is they said, here, we've paid for this or that or the other. But they, the sitter had more influence on the kids' lives than the parents. They might lash out at the child when pushed or irritated. Often it's in a two-worker scenario, but not always. Not always. I've seen it where there's a stay-at-home mom that doesn't want to engage with her kids, for example. They say, work it out for yourself. Can't you see I'm busy? No, I'm expected somewhere tonight. Get your mother to help you. Good grief. Can't you kids be more careful? Over there, you might even hear, over there, you're over there. What their children become are insecure and rebellious. They're unable to control themselves. They lack self-esteem because they think that their parent doesn't value them or that they think they have worth. And they're not real motivated to do well in school. So there's a lot of problems for the one who was neglected. Permissive parents. They have low rules. They have a lot of high loving support. I saw this thing on TV the other day about this guy that, is one of those crime things where he got murdered and unfortunately, but the kids loved him. But the mom said, yeah, he was the permissive parent. He was the one who was lovey-dovey and everything, and he let them do whatever they wanted to. They tend to be warm and supporting, but they're weak in establishing rules. And one thing is you do have to watch for this. In situations where you're having a co-parent, you're in a divorce situation, you might feel, or the other person might feel like they have to do something to win the kid's affection. You do have to monitor that kind of thing. But that can happen in the same household. I'm not saying it's exclusive to that. It also sometimes has to do with the style you were raised with and what your own values are. So anyway, the things they say, okay, you can stay up late this time. I know how much you like this show. You're tired, right? A paper route is a tough job. I'll take you around. Oh, this one in public. Please don't get mad at me. You're making a scene. Or please try to hurry. Mommy, you'll be late again if we don't start soon. The parent is not in control at all of the situation. The child senses he's in the driver's seat and can play his parent. One of the things you find that's very interesting with these, and you see it sometimes, I see it in youth work where it's the child of a permissive parent. They're looking for a boundary. They're pushing and they're looking for a boundary, and they're insecure, like they said, leaning against a wall that seems firm but falls. Where's the boundary? They sometimes respond more than you would think to a boundary because they want to know that they have some value and that somebody is watching for them. But they have little self-respect at times. They can't control their self or master discipline, and they can be manipulative of people and rules. With my oldest child, I waffled a little bit at the beginning when he was young between the permissive and the loving and firm. I wasn't very consistent. And I think as a result, he started getting the trait of negotiating things. He wanted to negotiate everything. Let's negotiate bedtime. Let's do all this. And once I started realizing that, and as I was trending and learning as a parent, I was able to clamp down on that more. Okay, and then where we want to be is the loving and firm. We want that blend of having high love and support for our children, but also having high limits and rules. And I don't know if I like the word controlling. That's the Gary Smalley word, but we certainly have our boundaries, right? So the description, clearly defined rules, limits, standards for living, how to they're trained how to understand those limits. They're warned when they go beyond them. There's consequences. There can be flexibility if an exception needs to be made. I think that this is where judgment comes in. And one of Gary Smalley's rules of thumb is if you're gonna make a mistake, if you're right on the cusp of do I follow the rule or do I have some compassion and some love, he says, fall on the side of love. Sometimes it's easy to stick with the rules, but what may be in the moment is needed in the moment is a bit of compassion. So keep that in mind. Express physical affection and spend time listening to them, maybe after 11 p.m. And then, things they say, hey, I wish I could let you stay up later, but we agreed on this time. Remember the choices chart from Same Page Parenting. The child helps especially as they grow older, helps make the rules. Look, we agreed bedtime is this time, curfew is this time, whatever. We agreed on that. You're really stuck. I'll help you this time. Then let's figure out how you can do it yourself next time. You say all the others will be there. I'd like more info before I say yes. That was my mantra. My kids got sick of that one. Did you practice piano? I hate to do this, but we agreed. No dinner before you're finished. We'll keep it warm for you. That may sound a lot like the dominant parent, but in reality, what you're doing is holding them to a standard, and then you'll follow up with the warm and loving support. You may sit there with them at dinner and have a conversation with them while they eat it late. What their children become is the highest in self-respect, respect of authority, interest in their parents' faith, least willing to join a rebellious group. They're more content, they have self-control, they're more secure, they understand limits. The lines of communication remain open between parent and child, even through teenage years. I would say that one is definitely true as my children have gone to adulthood. It was really interesting. Again, I went and consulted my daughter quite a bit on this lesson, just talking through different things with her. And she brought up some things along this point when I was telling her about the different kinds of parents. And she said, and I think all my children experience this, you really see the difference in parents when you get into high school and you start doing more things and you see how the parents react. And there's some that just let their kids do anything. And there's some that really clamp down on their kids completely. And she said, I had a friend, and it was one of her best friends, and she named her and said, we would go to do things, and she would say, I can't do that. Well, you haven't even asked your parents yet. They'll say no, because they say no to everything. And she said, I started realizing that, you were parents who listened to me, and you would adapt to the situation, and you would hear me out. You didn't always say yes, but you would hear me out. And she appreciated that. The other interesting thing she didn't mention, but I remember with this friend, is they almost always said no to her unless my daughter was involved. If my daughter was going, they would say yes because they trusted her, and they trusted us because they knew us. And they knew if Rebecca was going, it was probably an okay thing to do. So I didn't bring that up to her, but I do remember that very clearly on multiple occasions. In fact, they told me that, and Rebecca had told me that too. Okay, running out of time here, so let me go on to the 5 love languages. Again, review all that, and we'll talk about it more in just a second. The 5 love languages, I think this is something you can go online and learn a lot about. And what it means is that we give and receive love in ways that we perceive love. We may perceive that words of affirmation are loving. Or gift giving, physical touch, acts of service, quality time together. This guy, Gary Chapman, identified these 5 languages. And we tend to have a primary and a secondary. Really, I'm kind of balanced, but I have 2 or 3 main ones, and then a couple of them that aren't as important to me. And we tend to give in the language we want to receive in. But I think what you want to do in a household is be a student of the other people. Be a student of the other people and learn what their languages are. I understand some things about what my wife's primary languages are, which are different from mine, but I try to reach out and give to her in her languages. And I think she tries to do the same for me. Let me give an example of this. My 2 boys, I'll try to go through the example pretty quickly. 3, 4 years old, they're trying to learn. I want them to learn how to count to 100. I've just decided they need to know how to count to 100. They're smart enough. They're ready for it. The older one, when he went through that phase, didn't want to do it, couldn't count to 100. But I also knew that he was motivated by gift giving. And I said, you know what? When you can count to 100, I'm going to go out and buy that Millennium Falcon toy that you wanted. By the next day, he could count to 100. And then he went and got his toy. Okay. So the second one comes along, and I tried the same thing. Hey, I'll buy you this toy if you can count to 100. He's not interested in it at all. And then I started realizing that's not what he's wired by. So I came back to him and I said, you know what? We're going to have a daddy and son day after you can count to 100. We're going to celebrate and have a day together. Next day, he could count to 100 because he valued quality time together. Now take those 2 boys and fast forward them by about 10 to 12 years. So they're having problems with each other. Each one says, the other one doesn't love me. The other one says, what he's doing is hateful to me. He's not responding to me. I start realizing we have a love language problem. The older one thought he was giving love to the younger because he'd say, hey, here's $20. To him, that was love. The younger one was saying, I want some bro time together. The older one was like, what? And so they wouldn't do that. So I talked to them each individually about this love language thing. And this spark happened. They get together, they talk about it, and they started resolving things and recognizing their love for each other. And what they decided to do was they started a thing then called bro time, where they would go off together. And that was, the way that my older son would invest in the younger son. Now, I'm not sure how much my younger son gave gifts back, but they started getting along better because they started spending more time together. So that's, I thought that was very mature of the older one to bend and to do that. So look for that in your family. And to learn your love languages, there's a quiz that you can go take. And you can have that discussion and have your kids take it and see what it is. It will really help foster communications. And this all has to do with the emotional, right? It has to do with us emotionally developing to where we feel like we have love, we have value, we have worth. Our love tank is getting filled, that people are attuned to us, that we have a safe environment where we can express emotions, where we can have trust. All those things are important to everything I've been talking about today. So let me go to a Q&A time. We've got about 10 minutes or so left, but I do want to open it up. Let me take my screen off here and stop sharing that. And I do want to kind of get some comments going. Or you can ask me some questions, but I first want to ask you some questions. First of all, when you heard this stuff about the parenting types, did anybody have some sort of revelation about the way they were brought up and what they saw out of their parents? Anything that you might share about that? It's not exactly a small group, but I'll bet in a small group you would say more. Anyway, Jamie, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I think I would say, and I think some of it could be generational, but I feel like growing up, my parents were more like, because I said, mentality.
Yeah.
And that really was aggravating. I remember it thinking, geez, that's ridiculous, growing up. So, I mean, I try to not be like that. I mean, there are times when I'm like that, don't get me wrong. But for the most part, I try to give, not a long explanation, but I try to help them understand, let's put it that way, why we make the decisions we make, that we're not just trying to be mean, or we're not trying to just say, no, I don't care, that we do care. And that's why we're making the decisions we make. So I try to change that a little bit.
I think that's a really good comment. I think there's a fine line between negotiating and explaining, and a fine line between bending now and then or compromising on something and allowing a negotiation. You know what I mean? I hope that you can see the difference between those things. There's times when you're letting your rational judgment say, this is a different situation. I'm going to allow it. I'm going to bend in this case, make an exception to the rule. And I think explaining your rules without over-explaining everything, sometimes, I would explain things, but at a certain point, we're done explaining, right?
Yeah,
we're going to go in here, we're going to go follow the rules, right?
Yeah, you're not going to get an explanation for everything, because that's just going to wear me out.
Yeah, that's right. So we can have a rational explanation, but if you're stalling because you don't want to go to bed on time. I mean, I had that one happen, right? Okay. What we're doing is trying to get dad talking so I don't have to go to bed and I can stay up and get my way, right? It's like, come on, man, you're not pulling that on me.
I do think in this.
Yeah, got the echo going.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, giving up on it?
I think it's interesting that when I was looking at it, my husband and I were both saying it. I think I was looking on the output side of things, thinking about how we were parented. So it's interesting to see that the output side, like the characteristics that the child would have, I really did struggle with those things growing up. So it was interesting to see that the two really are related. So I guess instantly, okay, yeah, this is what I would think my parents, the category of their parenting style fit into, were these the things that I struggled with growing up. So it was
Yeah.
really easy to see that that model played out in my life. So it validated the model, I guess, in my mind. So I'm like, okay, I really need to pay attention to this. I really need to kind of think about these strategies as I try to actually fit it into like this love language like this, I guess the love language parameters. I
Yes.
think to some degree that dictates how you parent too. So
Yes.
I guess, just to digest that. So there's just that, I guess, so I can find myself in that parenting category that helps my kids not be in, I guess, a really, I don't know, I get that those, dysfunctional output categories.
I think that's a really interesting connection because it makes me think of somebody I know who has a dominant parent, and that dominant parent, their love is through gift giving, and that's about it. Okay, maybe acts of service. So there's never going to be a word of affirmation. There's not going to be a physical touch, and so as a result, they're giving love the way they think, and they say, "I love you." But the other person, that's not their value. And then you have the overarching thing about the dominant parent and not getting certain things out of the relationship to begin with. Now you've got a mess, right? Now you've got a mess.
I think what my wife and I have found is with all the influences today with, the electronics and the access to the internet, I think we have a very loving, obviously, family, but I think it's often we find ourselves playing the dominant role because we're so nervous about, trying to control some of that stuff. That's just these influences that are available to them. And I think that's where you have to find that balance. And it's tough. It's a back and forth.
I guarantee something you're going to hear out of the teens is they're going to tell you, and these are the good kids who are going to be talking to you, they're going to tell you, don't try to control everything. You've got to have, the key is to have trust in your children. Now, my daughter said the other night, you trusted me. I said, yeah, but you also earned the trust, right? You had to earn that trust. But when you earned the trust, we did trust you. So that's a very interesting dynamic, Jared. And we're going to talk more after the two. We're going to have a teen panel and we're going to have a parents panel. And after that, the week after that, I have a session called Parenting in an Impure World. And how do you address that kind of concern? Having heard what you're going to hear from the teens, having heard what you're going to hear from the parents, then how do we approach actually parenting in a world like that? And it doesn't mean that you don't, you always trust them and there's no control whatsoever, right? We're trying to be loving and firm. But what you're trying to do is groom your child to a point of earning the trust and then living the trust where, when the trust gets broken, then things get reeled back in. And they have to understand that as well. So it's not just putting on a false face for the parent. That's not what we want, because a lot of times you find out anyway. Any other general comments or questions on the lesson?
Comments. You were talking earlier about finding a place for where the kids can open up and kind of talk freely, a time and a place. And I've noticed it's kind of been born out of this quarantine period. My oldest, Sarah, is going to be 15 in June. And so I've been taking her to the high school to practice driving.
Yeah.
And it's really been an ideal time. I find that she, there are no distractions. We're not on our phones. We don't have sister there commenting and sharing. And she just talks more openly. And sometimes it's about things that have substance, and sometimes it's about TikTok or music or nothing. And it's been kind of refreshing to have that, 20 minutes a day that we're together, and it's easy. And so I really kind of welcomed that, and I'm going to keep doing it. So
that's a great idea. One thing about the going into the bedroom is you get that one-on-one time, right? And if you have multiple kids, especially, that doesn't always happen. And my wife felt more disconnected from the kids because she didn't tend to do that. she tends to want to be invited in rather than go march in. But I think where she got some of her time was in driving and that sort of thing. So, yeah, I think that's a great observation. And if you can find those times when they can just stream, it doesn't always have to be something heavy. Sometimes it's when you can talk about, when you feel like you can talk about the little things and you see the parents' reaction to it, then you feel more trusting to open up on the bigger things. Mm-hmm. This doesn't have to be adversarial. It really doesn't. It can be a partnership. And that's what Ready, Set, Goodbye is all about, is how can we make this a partnership to raise our children up into adults. And, to start, and along about now, starting to pivot to where you're seeing it that way.
See, so one more thing I was going to ask earlier about just kind of the being vulnerable as a parent and stuff like that. I feel like sometimes after you talk with your kid about something or something has happened, that what they actually heard and what you were trying to say are two different things. And so I have found times where maybe the next day or, after everything's settled in for a little bit, you go back and say, that stuff we were talking about yesterday, what did you hear me say? And just hear what they say. And it proves to them, A, you care. You haven't just blown off and you're over it, you don't care. And then B, it kind of gives you the second shot to say, okay, the other thing I was trying to portray to you is not only X, but Y, because they might have just missed what you were trying to say, or you didn't explain it as well as you thought you did.
I think that's fantastic. I'm going to add it to the lesson for the future. For one thing, and I think the other thing is, even if they got it right, it reinforces it. I was having a conversation with my daughter and she's like, you never told me anything about sex. I said, really? I know that mom handled certain aspects, but here's what I told you. Do you remember this? Oh yeah, I knew I got that from somewhere. Yeah, I got it. I gave it to you. I'm the one who said that. Right. So if you're going back, it may reinforce a little bit what your message is, and they hear it a second time. Right.
It's actually funny you said that, because I just learned that leadership skill in a class I was in 2 years ago. When you work with employees, saying exactly that. I'm not sure
Really?
I don't know what you heard. I don't know what I said until you tell me what you heard.
Oh, yeah, that's good.
And it's so true. That's a great point.
Yeah, love it. Love it. Thanks. Well, we need to wrap up. I know I want to get to 11 o'clock service. Maybe some of you do too also, although, you can always watch it recorded. But let's pray out. Do you have any particular prayer requests that you'd like to lift up? I'm grateful that we've had some new people on the call today who didn't join us last week, and so it's been great to have you on, and that's a joy. So let me pray us out here. Heavenly Father, we reach out to you during this most crazy of times. We're looking for something stable in our lives, and you're there. You're our rock. You're our redeemer. You're never changing. You're ever constant. Help us to find your love in the midst of this. We pray for our world. We pray for leaders. We pray for healthcare professionals to all be safe and to make right decisions. We pray for those afflicted, whether it's medically, economically, emotionally, through depression, through isolation. We lift up all those. Help us to look for those places where we can impact someone else, even if in a small way. I lift up these families during their time together. I pray for their communications, for their ability to communicate love and to hear each other and to share in the ways that we discussed today. Be with us as we go and be your people. In your name we pray. Amen. Great. Okay, well, next week we'll wrap up the Ready, Set, Goodbye with talking about physical development, which will include some discussion of that topic of SEX. So we'll talk about that some next week. Yeah, Scott is shocked. Great to see y'all. Hey, if you want to be in touch, again, I've got a YouTube channel. If you want to see stuff, I put up Devos on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. My current one up from yesterday is called My Cat's Perspective on Suffering. It takes the big topic of suffering and looks at it in a new way. So there's other good stuff up there. I'm on Facebook. I'd love to connect with you on Facebook. I guess I should be doing that. But I also have a Cecil Taylor Ministries Facebook page, and I put something up every day on that, even if it's just a Bible verse or whatever. I'm getting to where I put something up every day. Sometimes it's a connection to a video that I've done, or sometimes it's just, whatever's on my mind. So anyway, please check it out as part of your spiritual nourishment as you go on through this time and beyond. So anyway, bye everybody. Thanks.
Thank you.